The bustling city square was alive with the hum of activity. Street vendors called out to passers-by, hawking everything from colorful scarves to the aroma of freshly roasted chestnuts. Children darted around, their laughter echoing in the crisp autumn air, while shoppers strolled with bags in hand. Amid this lively scene, an elderly man shuffled slowly along the cobblestone path, his cane tapping softly against the ground. His frail frame was cloaked in a worn military jacket, its faded patches whispering tales of a time long past. At 91 years old, he was a living testament to history, a veteran whose service was etched into his very being. He paused near a park bench, his weathered face lit with a gentle smile as he watched the world go by. His name was William, though most in the neighborhood simply called him Mr. Bill. For decades, he had been a quiet fixture of the community, always ready with a kind word or a story about the old days. But today, something felt off. There was a tension in the air, an unease that seemed to ripple through the crowd like a faint tremor. That was when they appeared, a group of young men, loud and brash, their presence cutting through the jovial atmosphere like a cold wind. They swaggered into the square, their voices raised in mocking laughter as they shoved each other playfully, their energy teetering on the edge of menace. The crowd instinctively parted, giving them a wide berth, though no one dared to intervene. One of them, a lanky figure with a baseball cap tilted low over his face, pointed at Mr. Bill. "Hey, old man," he called out, his tone dripping with mockery. "Nice jacket. You in some kinda club or something?" His friends erupted in laughter, their voices echoing against the surrounding buildings. Mr. Bill turned slowly, his eyes meeting theirs with a quiet dignity. "It's a military jacket," he said softly, his voice steady despite the quiver in his hands. "From my time in the service." Another thug, stockier and more aggressive, stepped forward. "Service, huh? What, you think you're some kinda hero?" He snatched at the lapel of Mr. Bill's jacket, tugging it roughly. The veteran stumbled slightly but kept his footing, his grip tightening on his cane. The square seemed to hold its breath. People stopped in their tracks, their eyes darting between the thugs and the elderly man. Some whispered among themselves, debating whether to step in, but fear kept them rooted in place. After all, the group of young men looked like trouble. Mean, unpredictable trouble. "Look," Mr. Bill said, his voice calm but firm. "I don't want any trouble. Just let me be." But the bullies weren't interested in letting him be. They circled him like predators, their sneers growing more pronounced. One of them mimicked the shuffle of Mr. Bill's walk, exaggerated and cruel. Another reached out to snatch the cap from his head, laughing as he tossed it to a friend. That's when it happened. From the edge of the square, a figure began to approach. Tall, imposing, and dressed in the unmistakable uniform of a royal guard, the man moved with a quiet authority that commanded attention. His polished black boots clicked against the cobblestones with each deliberate step, the crisp lines of his red and black uniform catching the light. The crowd noticed him immediately, a murmur spreading as people turned to watch. He was a striking figure, his deep brown skin radiant under the afternoon sun, and his sharp eyes locked onto the scene unfolding before him. There was no hesitation in his stride, no faltering in his gaze. He moved with the confidence of someone who had faced far worse and come out victorious. The thugs, too caught up in their mockery, didn't notice him at first, but as the crowd began to shift, their laughter faltered. The stocky one turned, his bravado momentarily slipping as his eyes widened at the sight of the approaching guard. "What's this now?" he muttered, nudging his friend. The guard stopped a few paces away, his expression calm but unyielding. His presence alone was enough to silence the square. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured, yet it carried the weight of someone who wasn't asking twice. "Is there a problem here?" The leader of the group, trying to save face, puffed out his chest. "No problem. Just having a little fun, that's all." The guard's eyes narrowed, his gaze shifting to Mr. Bill, who was standing quietly, his hand still trembling slightly. "Doesn't look like fun to me," the guard replied, his tone cutting through the thug's bravado like a blade. The tension in the square was palpable, the air heavy with anticipation. No one dared to move, their eyes glued to the unfolding confrontation. The thugs shifted uncomfortably, their earlier confidence now a fragile facade. And as the royal guard took another step forward, his presence radiating an undeniable authority, it became clear that this was no ordinary man. Whatever happened next would change the dynamic of the square and the lives of everyone in it forever. The leader of the group, still clinging to his bravado, crossed his arms and took a step toward the royal guard. His smirk was forced, but his voice carried a thin layer of defiance. "What's it to you? We're just talking to the old man. No harm done." The guard didn't flinch, didn't even blink. His steady gaze bore into the thug, making him shift uncomfortably under the weight of it. The crowd around them was completely silent now, their collective breath held in anticipation. The tension was almost unbearable, like a storm about to break. "Talking?" the guard asked, his voice calm but firm, each word deliberate. "That's not what it looked like to me. It looked like you were harassing a man who's done more for this country than you could ever imagine." He took another step closer, his towering presence making the thug take an instinctive step back. Mr. Bill stood quietly to the side, his grip on his cane tightening. He glanced at the guard, a flicker of gratitude and disbelief in his eyes. He hadn't expected anyone to step in, let alone someone like this, a figure of authority who seemed to embody both strength and integrity. It was a sharp contrast to the group of young men, whose confidence was rapidly unraveling. The stocky thug, perhaps emboldened by the attention of the crowd or his own misguided pride, decided to push back. "Look, man, we don't need a lecture, all right? You don't even know what this is about." The guard's expression didn't change, but his tone turned sharper, cutting through the thug's words like a blade. "I don't need to know what it's about. I know enough. And what I see are a group of cowards picking on someone who can't defend himself. That ends now." The leader of the group glanced at his friends, clearly searching for backup, but the others were starting to edge away, their earlier bravado fading under the guard's unyielding presence. The crowd, sensing the shift, began to murmur quietly among themselves. There was something captivating about the scene unfolding before them, a confrontation that felt larger than the moment itself. One of the bystanders, a middle-aged woman clutching a shopping bag, whispered to the man next to her, "Who is he? He's not just any guard, is he?" The man shook his head, his gaze fixed on the guard. "No, he's not. That's one of the king's royal guards. You don't mess with them. They're trained for situations way worse than this." The murmurs grew louder as more people recognized the significance of the guard's uniform. The royal guards were a symbol of honor and discipline, known for their unwavering dedication to protecting the monarchy and the people. To see one of them here, stepping in to defend an elderly veteran, was both unexpected and inspiring. The leader of the thugs, now visibly uncomfortable, tried to salvage his pride. All right, he muttered, raising his hands in mock surrender. "We're done here. No need to make a big deal out of it." But the guard wasn't finished. He stepped closer, his voice low but carrying an unmistakable edge. "You don't walk away without an apology." To him. He nodded toward Mr. Bill, whose frail figure seemed even smaller next to the towering presence of the guard. The thug hesitated, his face a mixture of anger and humiliation. He glanced at his friends, but they offered no support, their eyes avoiding his. Finally, with a begrudging mumble, he turned to Mr. Bill. "Sorry," he muttered, barely audible. The guard's expression didn't soften. "Louder. Like you mean it." The thug clenched his jaw, his pride warring with the realization that he had no choice. "I said I'm sorry," he repeated, his voice louder but still laced with resentment. Mr. Bill, ever the gentleman, gave a small nod. "Apology accepted," he said quietly, his tone devoid of malice. His dignity remained intact, even in the face of such humiliation. The guard stepped back slightly, his posture relaxing just enough to signal that the confrontation was over. The thugs didn't need to be told twice. They slinked away, their earlier bravado completely shattered. The crowd watched in silence as they disappeared into the streets, their departure leaving a strange stillness in the air. For a moment, no one moved. Then, a ripple of applause broke out, hesitant at first, but quickly growing in strength. The crowd began to cheer, their voices filled with gratitude and admiration. The guard didn't acknowledge the applause. His focus remained on Mr. Bill. "Are you all right, sir?" he asked, his voice softening. Mr. Bill nodded, his eyes glistening with unspoken emotion. "I'm fine, thanks to you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stepped in." The guard gave a small, respectful nod. "Just doing my duty." As the crowd began to disperse, the excitement fading into the hum of the city, a young boy approached the guard hesitantly. He couldn't have been more than 10 years old, his wide eyes filled with awe. "Are you a real royal guard?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The guard crouched down to the boy's level, a warm smile breaking through his stern demeanor. "Yes, I am." The boy's face lit up with wonder. "Wow, you're like a hero." The guard chuckled softly, glancing briefly at Mr. Bill. "Sometimes, doing the right thing makes you a hero, even if it's something small." The boy nodded solemnly, as if committing the words to memory. With one last look of admiration, he ran back to his parents, who gave the guard a grateful nod before leading their son away. As the square returned to its usual rhythm, Mr. Bill and the guard found themselves standing alone. The veteran's voice was quiet but filled with sincerity. "You didn't have to do that, son. But I'm glad you did." The guard looked at him, his expression thoughtful. "Men like you paved the way for the rest of us. The least I can do is stand up for you when it's needed." There was a pause, the weight of unspoken words lingering between them. Finally, Mr. Bill extended a trembling hand. The guard shook it firmly, a silent exchange of respect and gratitude passing between them. But as the guard prepared to leave, something caught his eye, something in the way the thugs had reacted to his presence, as if they'd recognized him or feared more than just his uniform. It was a fleeting thought, but one that lingered as he turned to walk away. Unbeknownst to anyone in the square, this was only the beginning. The events of the day would set off a chain reaction, unraveling secrets and connections that no one could have anticipated. The guard's intervention was not just an act of kindness. It was the spark that would ignite something far larger than either he or Mr. Bill could imagine. As the royal guard walked away, a feeling of unease settled over the square, like the calm before a storm. The crowd began to disperse, murmuring among themselves, but something lingered in the air, an unspoken tension that hadn't quite dissipated. Mr. Bill stood still, watching the figure of the guard fade into the distance. His mind was racing, as it often did these days, with thoughts of the past and the world he had fought to protect. He'd seen so much in his lifetime. Too much, perhaps. But the events of today, this unexpected confrontation, felt different. There was something about the guard's words, his presence, that hinted at a deeper connection. As Mr. Bill slowly made his way home, his steps grew heavier, burdened by the weight of memories long buried. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, not just in the square, but in the world around him. And it wasn't just the thugs or the royal guard. It was something bigger, something lurking beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. Meanwhile, the royal guard, whose name was Malik, was grappling with his own unease. He had done his duty, no doubt. But as he walked through the winding streets of the city, heading back to the barracks, his thoughts kept drifting back to the encounter with Mr. Bill. There was something about the old man, something familiar, though he couldn't place it. The way Mr. Bill had looked at him, the quiet gratitude in his eyes, had struck a chord deep within him. Malik had seen that look before, but it had never been directed at him. Not in this way. The deeper Malik thought about it, the more it bothered him. He knew that feeling all too well. It was the same look a soldier might give their comrade when they shared a bond forged in the heat of battle. But Malik had never met Mr. Bill before today. So why did it feel like they had crossed paths before? Lost in thought, Malik turned a corner and found himself face to face with a familiar figure, a man who had once been a mentor to him, someone he trusted with his life in the toughest of situations. "Malik," the man said, his voice low and cautious, "we need to talk." Malik stiffened. "What's going on, Captain?" The captain's eyes flickered around, as if checking to see if anyone was listening. "There's trouble brewing, something bigger than we anticipated." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. It's about the thugs you just dealt with. Malik frowned. I handled them. They were just kids with too much bravado. The captain shook his head, his face grim. It's not about them. It's about who they were working for. Malik's pulse quickened. He'd suspected there was something off about the situation, but he hadn't thought it ran this deep. Who were they working for? The captain's gaze flickered to the side, his voice barely audible. There's a syndicate operating in the shadows. A group pulling strings behind the scenes, using people like those thugs to create chaos. And they've been watching you. Malik's stomach tightened. Why me? The captain met his gaze, his expression hardening. I don't know yet, but I do know this. Whoever they are, they're connected to something far more dangerous than petty street crime. And they've been waiting for the right moment to strike. Malik's mind raced as the weight of the captain's words sank in. He had always known that his position in the Royal Guard wasn't just a job, it was a responsibility. But he had never imagined that the threat could come from the very city he swore to protect. The thought of hidden forces pulling the strings, orchestrating chaos from the shadows, made his blood run cold. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized that the thug's harassment of Mr. Bill wasn't random. It was deliberate. As the captain turned to leave, he placed a hand on Malik's shoulder. Stay vigilant. And don't trust anyone blindly, not even me. With that, the captain disappeared into the night, leaving Malik standing in the dimly lit street, his mind spinning with questions and uncertainty. Back at Mr. Bill's modest apartment, the old man sat by the window, staring out at the city's skyline. He had lived here for decades, long before the towering skyscrapers and bustling crowds had become the norm. He had seen the city change, watched it grow, but something in the air felt different now. It wasn't just the thugs or the Royal Guard, it was the sense that something was shifting, something darker and more insidious. He had seen the signs of unrest before, during his time in the military, but this felt personal. It felt like a storm was gathering on the horizon, one that no one saw coming. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Mr. Bill's hand paused over the glass of water he had been about to drink. He wasn't expecting anyone, not at this hour. Slowly, he rose from his chair and shuffled to the door. When he opened it, he was surprised to find a woman standing there, her face unfamiliar, but her eyes filled with purpose. "Are you Mr. Bill?" she asked, her voice steady but urgent. He nodded. "I am. Can I help you?" The woman hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward. "I need to speak with you. It's important." Mr. Bill's instincts kicked in. There was something in her demeanor that put him on edge. He had seen enough during his years of service to recognize when something wasn't right. "What's this about?" he asked, his tone cautious. "I can't explain everything right now," she said, glancing over her shoulder as if checking to make sure no one was watching. "But I need you to trust me. This is bigger than you know." Mr. Bill narrowed his eyes. "Who are you?" The woman's eyes flickered to the side once more, a flash of fear crossing her face. "My name is Elise. I'm not here to cause trouble. But you're in danger. You've been targeted." The words hit him like a cold gust of wind. Targeted? Mr. Bill had lived a long life, long enough to know when someone was serious and when they were trying to manipulate him. But there was something about Elise's urgency, her desperation, that made him pause. Before he could respond, a voice came from behind him. "Who's at the door, Bill?" It was his old neighbor James, a gruff man who had lived next door for years. He had seen enough to know when something was off, too. Elisa's eyes widened, and for a split second, Mr. Bill could see a flicker of fear in her gaze. Something wasn't right, and whatever she had come to warn him about had just taken a darker turn. The storm that had been building in the background was now front and center, and Mr. Bill was about to get caught in the middle of it.